Okay, everyone, so let's go ahead and begin on lecture 2. So this is the last lecture for today, okay? And so what I want you to do is consider the term geologic time, okay? So when you hear the term geologic time, what does that mean to you? Take a moment, pause lecture, and just write something below the slide as far as what this actually means to you when you hear this phrase. So geologic time is basically time on the geologic time scale, okay? And so we're dealing with millions of years, billions of years, a really, really long time frame. And to be honest, it's a time frame that we will never physically be able to live through, in a sense that, we only live 100 years if we're lucky. Okay, so geologic time in the stratigraphic record, so basically geologic time is recorded in the rock layers. Okay, and so we have layered or laminated rocks, and geologists will often determine which order these rocks were formed in, and of course, oldest to youngest. So take a second, where should the oldest rocks be? At the bottom of the layer or the top? The oldest should be at the bottom, right? And the youngest should be at the top. And so the next time you guys happen to see some sort of layering in the rocks, just realize that the oldest are at the bottom and the youngest are at the top. Now, what I also want you to realize, and you can see that easily on the figure on the left, okay? What I also want you to realize is a lot of times there's a lot of bending and a lot of pressure and a lot of heat, okay? And all of that can actually cause the rocks to bend. So the picture that you're looking on the right, at the very, very top, that little tiny dot, by the way, that's a human. Okay, so you can see, though, that the oldest tend to be towards the bottom, but there's a severe bending. Can you imagine the kind of pressure that it takes for that to happen? I mean, it's something that would squish us in a heartbeat. Okay, so, but it's what happens in the rocks is as the tectonic activity, as things are moving around, there's a lot of heat and pressure, rocks can actually bend, and in fact, they will do so. Okay, so, but the cool part is that you still have to just keep track of this as you're realizing where the old rocks versus the young rocks are located. So there are different scales of time, by the way, and so humans operate on the physiologic time scale. Write that down. Humans operate here. So when it comes to physiologic time scale, we're dealing with seconds, we're dealing with minutes, we're dealing with hours. Oh, good Lord, how long is she going to be talking on before lecture is over? That's physiologic time scale, even though it might seem like geologic, okay? So physiologic, again, seconds, minutes, hours, decades, if we're lucky. Ontogenetic time, that's more like 100 years, okay? And we're lucky if we get that. Or 10,000 years, or 100,000 years. So that's kind of in the middle. And there are critters, by the way, that exist at that, and that's the time frame that they operate at. Not many, but there's a few. Then we get to the geologic time frame, okay? And so the geologic time frame, of course, that's when you're dealing with millions of years, billions of years, okay? So it's kind of hard for us to picture, like, what does 1 million actually look like? Well, let's say you have a blade of grass, okay? And let's say this virus were to magically disappear and we start having football season again. Yay! Okay. Just kidding, sort of. So 20 years would be represented by a blade of grass, and 1 million years would be represented by a football field. Okay? Now, it's not perfect, but this gives you an idea of what 1 million tends to look like. And again, it's hard for us to sort of justify that, or be able to operate on that level when it comes to millions of years, because it's something we will never see. Now, there's two different ways that people have measured the age of the Earth, and one is called the relative time scale, and the other is called radiometric time scale. Okay, so relative time scale means that you're comparing one rock core against or rock assemblage against another one, so they're relative to one another. Okay, radiometric means you're actually using science to get a definitive absolute date on a fossil. So we'll talk more about this later on in the next couple of lectures, but you use radiometric to figure out something is, 5 million years old, or, 10,000 years old, or something along those lines. And you're using basically unstable isotopes to do so. And again, don't panic, flashback to chemistry, nobody panic, okay? So when we talk about it, it's definitely a really cool process of how it happens. And so we'll talk about it later on. I promise you guys will find it interesting. So when you learn a new field of something, by the way, you've got to know who contributed what. It's just the way it is, okay? And so it's something that I wish that my professors had taught me. And so part of what I do with teaching is I want to give you guys the knowledge that I didn't have, and that I had to kind of figure out on my own because it's actually really hard to do. Not really hard to do, I didn't enjoy it. Okay, so it's way more fun when you are attending a class and you got someone that points all of the cool stuff out to you. So one scientist that was incredibly important, his name is James Hutton. And so James Hutton came up with what is known as the rock cycle, and we will talk more about in depth in the rock cycle the next lecture. The second scientist, his name is William Strata Smith. Seriously, how cool of a nickname is that, to be called William Strata Smith? Okay, so basically he was a scientist who looked at the strata of different rock layers and so forth, and he discovered some pretty cool things. So James Hutton again was the rock cycle, and we'll talk more about him next lecture. William Strata Smith was one of the ones who came up with what's actually on the next slide, known as the key index fossil. Write that down, key index fossil. So what a key index fossil is used for is it's a fossil that was generally only found in one spot in time. Okay, so whenever you see a key index fossil, you know that that fossil is approximately X million years old, and it doesn't matter where you see it because it's only found at that, at that particular time period. You know that, that's how old that particular fossil is. And this, again, William Strata Smith came up with this. Okay, so let's say you're sampling fossils in Europe, and then you happen to sample fossils in the U.S., and your strata don't necessarily line up. And then you find your key index fossil, and you know that, as long as you have that in both of your core samples, you have an idea of approximately, how old those samples actually are, because you're dating them relative to one another. Okay, and keep in mind too, this was before radiometric dating, when we could get an exact date on something. So this is back when we were using relative dating, and this was incredibly useful and very important to use. So we kind of touched on this last time, that there's many different fields of science that contribute to reconstructing the sequence of events that shape the Earth. Okay, so paleontology, the study of fossils; stratigraphy, the study of the strata layers; petrology, the study of what makes up the rocks. Okay, all of these are incredibly useful when you're trying to figure out, how the Earth formed to be what it is today. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I find rock cores absolutely fascinating. I guess my husband says I need to get out more, but to me this stuff is really cool. Okay, so here we have 3 different rock cores, and they were taken from Hope County, which it shows you a map at the very bottom left. Okay, and what you can see is as they took these cores, they're several miles apart, okay, but they have very similar shading, which means that, the rock was laid down in a very similar manner between these 3 areas, and this allows you to make comparisons between the 3. Okay, so this again would be relative because you're comparing them against one another, but it also shows you that even though you have an entire county that your samples are split across, you can still see similarities in these particular patterns, which is so cool because then you know what was going on in the history of the Earth at that time period. Okay, and that stuff's pretty awesome. Okay guys, this stuff is even cooler. Okay, so over a wider range, spanning Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado. If you guys have not had a chance to go out to the Southwest, as soon as all this stuff clears up, if you can travel, I highly recommend it. The Grand Canyon, all these places are actually pretty amazing. But what's even cooler about them is the fact that scientists have been able to actually piece together rock formations between all of these areas, okay? And because of that, they've learned that, relatively speaking, they know how old things are and how old the exposures are because there's similarities among all of them. I mean, how awesome is that? So Colorado and Utah, they can line up really, really well, okay? And between Bryce Canyon and Mesa Verde, not only that, Zion and Canyonlands in Utah line up really well, and you can even find similarities between Canyonlands and the Grand Canyon. Okay, so that tells you about the conditions that are going on, and each piece, okay, each bit of information is kind of like a piece to a puzzle. And what happens is we kind of know what conditions certain rocks are formed, and that can tell you about what type of environmental conditions were going on when these rock formations came about, and that stuff is pretty awesome, got to admit. So we're going to go a little bit more in depth in radiometric dating. Okay, so we use what are called unstable isotopes for radiometric dating, and these come in the form of lead and carbon and uranium and so forth. And so the way this works is that you have, think back to chemistry, the chemistry y'all tried to forget long ago, okay? What is an atom made of? It's got protons and neutrons, which are in the nucleus, and then the electrons are whizzing around the outside, okay? And so what's going on with this with radiometric dating is you have different forms of these atoms. So what I want you to do is to compare each of these, okay? And for example, carbon-12 is the stable form. And then compare that to carbon-14, which is the unstable form. And what happens is the carbon-14 will actually decay. And I also want you to know that when it decays to nitrogen-14, not another form of carbon. Okay, and we're only touching on this today, but we're going to go in a lot more depth in the next lecture. Okay, but I just want you to at least get an idea of how radiocarbon dating works. Okay, so different isotopes, different form of the same element. Okay, based on you know what we see here. You can look at between carbon-12 and carbon-14. Okay, so make the comparison, and then you count the number of we'll call it daughter and parent, and actually flip to the next, well, you don't even have to flip, but in your slides, flip to the next slide, because then we'll talk about it on the snail shell in the next second. One thing I kept forgetting to say, by the way, is that the unstable isotope, it's the number of neutrons that differ, okay? So what you do is you measure the amount of the unstable carbon-14, that's the parent product, write that down, and then you measure the daughter product, which is what it decays into, which in this case is nitrogen-14. And the whole idea is, let's say you have a fossil, okay, and you measure the amount of carbon-14, you find out you have a lot of it. That's the parent product, a lot of parent product, and then very little of the daughter product, the nitrogen-14. So would you consider your fossil to be old or young then, if you have a bunch of parent product? Your fossil would be very young, okay, because not much time has passed for that to actually decay. Okay, now if you had the flip side where you had a second fossil, and you had a bunch of nitrogen-14 and not much carbon-14, that tells you it's a really old fossil, okay? Because of the fact you've had a lot of time to go by for that parent to decay into the daughter product. This can be confusing, especially if you guys had a bad scarring experience in chemistry. So if you did, just write it out and make sure it makes sense, okay? But don't panic yet, because we're going to revisit this again in the next lecture. Okay, so if things don't quite click yet, it's not a big deal. Wait till the next lecture, and if they still don't click, then I should see you guys in office hours, by the way, because I always love seeing you guys. This is why I went into teaching. As much as, you know, I'm okay with the online format because we don't have a choice, but to be perfectly honest, I would much rather see your smiling faces in class, because that's why it's fun. So I love seeing you guys when you come to office hours, okay? If not, I understand, but if you can, come see me, otherwise I get bored. So we have several divisions of Earth's history, and this is basically so scientists can talk to one another. Okay, so eons is the broadest span of time, and I will give you examples on the next slide. Eras is when it's subdivided further, periods are subdivided further, and epochs are subdivided even further. And they tend to be divided on major events that happened, or extinctions that happened, or something along those lines. Okay, so eons, eras, periods, epochs, and then what I want you to do is go to the next slide, and then we can actually talk about examples of each of these. Now, I don't know about all of you, but when I was an undergrad, I will admit, whenever I saw what looked to be a complicated figure, I would panic. Don't do that, okay? When you see a scientific figure like this, all you do, the first thing is you read the axes. Now, millions of years is on the y-axis to the right, going from current all the way down, okay? And then we've got across the top, on the x-axis, we've got eons, eras, periods, epochs. Aha, we just talked about this. So the eons are divided in between two. Eras are divided up a bit more. Periods, we've got Quaternary, Tertiary, Cretaceous, Jurassic, all sorts of other good stuff, and epochs are divided up even finer. So with those divisions, you can see how much time to the right there is for each of them, okay? Now, these aren't named randomly, and there's actually a purpose to their naming system. So let's talk about the eras first. We've got Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Well, Paleo means old, so it's the oldest era. Meso means middle, and Ceno means new. That's where that naming system came from. Okay, no, you don't have to memorize this, but I want you to understand it. Additionally, there's some history in here as well with regards to scientists, and this part's even cooler. If you look at periods, there's the Quaternary and Tertiary, but then it changes. Well, what happened was there was obviously a secondary and a primary, but over time, scientists divvied those up even further. okay, but they still have tertiary and quaternary in there because they've been okay for now. So there's a lot of science and history actually in this figure, which is why it's one of my favorites, okay? So again, whenever you see a figure, you just read the axis, take a deep breath, and realize it's going to be fine. Now, this is one of my favorite figures because it starts 4.6 billion years ago, which, by the way, that's the age of the Earth. You should write that down somewhere. 4.6 billion years, okay? Then it shows you over time how life evolves and how initially things were relatively simple, starting out with single-celled critters and maybe some multi-celled critters. But it wasn't basically until a time period known as the Cambrian explosion, okay, which is on the second loop from the top, that life really just basically exploded. Okay, and then critters started moving to land, and then we started having even more interesting critters going around, and dinosaurs and all sorts of other cool stuff. And again, humans didn't make our appearance until the last 200,000 years because we were late. My husband says I'm always late. Yeah, he's not wrong. Again, you don't have to memorize this figure, but it's a nice setup for things that we're going to be talking about all throughout this particular semester, okay? So just make sure it makes sense and you kind of see what's going on. Okay, so your project, and I mentioned it earlier, I basically want you to take a topic that we only touch on in class and then dive in much deeper. And you can put together whatever media you are happy with. So if you want to put together a podcast, you're welcome to do so. If you'd rather do a web page, you're totally welcome to do so. I want you to put together some sort of, project that you have an artistic expression for, that you guys get to be creative and be yourself. And I've had some really amazing projects throughout the years, and this is so much fun for me. So I am going to release the information on the project. I don't want to do it today because school doesn't start till tomorrow, and I don't want everybody panicking and overloading on information. But I'll definitely do it before Friday. Okay, and again, it's going to be things we'll be doing 4 stages. It's meant to be super chill and relaxed, and so by the time you get feedback at every single stage, and if all goes well, towards the very end with those last 25 points or whatever, if you've done as I asked previously, then you'll just it'll basically just be a rubber stamp, and you'll get those points, and everything will be good. So these are just some potential podcast / webpage topics just from today. Okay, just to give you guys start thinking about it. And if nothing tickles your fancy yet and you haven't found anything, it's totally fine. You got lots of time to figure it out. All right, so I wish you all a wonderful day. I will talk to you again on Friday. This wraps it up for today. Have a good one.